Marcus Harlow didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. Get rid of it. 3 words, spoken to the woman carrying his child. Spoken the way a man orders coffee flat, disposable, already forgotten before the sentence ended. Elena stood in the doorway of his study, 7 months pregnant, still wearing the coat she hadn't taken off because she'd come straight from the hospital. The ultrasound photo was still in her hand. She'd driven 40 minutes through traffic to share this with him. He was texting the woman she'd found out about 6 days ago. Marcus, I said what I said. He finally looked up. Not at her face, at her stomach. Something passed across his expression, not guilt. Inconvenience. We'll talk about the logistics tomorrow. Elena didn't cry, she didn't scream. She simply folded the ultrasound photo and put it in her pocket, and said nothing. If you've ever had to swallow something so painful that speaking felt impossible, stay with me. Because Ina's silence wasn't weakness, and what comes next will show you exactly what it was. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where everything began to fall apart. The first time Elena Voss walked into a room and made Marcus Harlow stop talking, she hadn't tried to. She'd been late to the contract, signing some minor acquisition Marcus's legal team had arranged with a pharmaceutical distribution company. She'd come in through the wrong door, wrong floor, wrong conference room entirely, realized her mistake in about 3 seconds, and turned to leave. But she'd knocked over a standing display case on her way out, and the crash had silenced the entire room. And when Marcus looked up expecting to see one of his own people, he saw a woman in a slightly too large blazer, holding a cracked glass panel and looking at it with the specific expression of someone calculating whether they could just set it down quietly and walk away before anyone said anything. She couldn't. Everyone was already looking. I am so sorry, she said. Wrong floor. Marcus had stared at her for a long moment. Then he'd laughed. Actually laughed, not the controlled, deliberate sound he used at dinners or negotiations, but something real and unexpected that his own team didn't quite know how to respond to. Wrong building, actually, he said. We leased the whole tower. Elena looked at him, then looked back at the cracked display case, then back at him. I'll pay for that, you won't. I will. Give me an invoice. He gave her his card instead. That was 5 years, before she stood in the doorway of his study, 7 months pregnant, holding an ultrasound photo while he told her to get rid of their child. 5 years. And somewhere in that time, the man who had laughed genuinely, unexpectedly laughed, had become someone who looked at his pregnant wife the way he looked at a problem on a spreadsheet. She didn't understand how it had happened, so gradually she hadn't noticed until it was already done. The first year of their marriage had been real. She believed that. Marcus was demanding, yes, controlling in ways she'd told herself, were just the habits of a man used to running everything. He was possessive of her time, impatient with her work, uncomfortable when she traveled without him. But he was also present in those early months. He remembered things. He showed up. When she miscarried at 11 weeks in the spring of their first year, he had held her in their bathroom at 3 in the morning and said nothing, just held her. And she had believed they were the kind of couple that could survive the things that broke other people. She had been wrong about what survival required. The Harlow name opened doors that shouldn't open. Elena had understood intellectually what Marcus did before she married him. His family controlled logistics networks across 6 states, and some of what moved through those networks wasn't the kind of cargo that appeared in official manifests. She hadn't been naive. She'd known. But knowing a thing from a distance and living inside it were different extents entirely. And the further Marcus rose inside that world, the less room there was for anything that didn't serve it. Including her, she had adapted. That was the honest word. Not survived, adapted. She learned which questions not to ask. She learned how to be present at dinners where the conversation never quite said what it meant. She learned how to carry herself in rooms full of men who were deciding things that affected thousands of people and never thought about that for a single second. She was good at it, better than Marcus ever acknowledged. And then she'd gotten pregnant. Not accidentally. They had discussed it. Or Marcus had said, one evening in December, that it might be time to think about it, and Elena had understood that to mean it was decided, and she had wanted a child, had wanted one since the miscarriage. If she was being honest, So she had stopped the careful management of her own biology and let nature do what it did. 4 months later, she was pregnant. 2 months after that, she found the messages. She hadn't been looking. That was the part that still felt surreal. She hadn't gone through his phone out of suspicion. She'd picked it up because hers was charging in the other room, and she wanted to check the weather before their morning run, and the screen was unlocked, and the notification was right there at the top. Last night was different. I think you know that. The name attached to the message was Kara. Just Kara, no last name. The contact had a small red heart beside it. Elena had set the phone face down on the nightstand and finished getting dressed and gone downstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter for 11 minutes before her hands stopped shaking. She did not confront him that morning. She did not confront him that week. This was the part people never understood about her, the part Marcus himself had spent their entire marriage misreading. When Elena went quiet, it didn't mean she had nothing to say. It meant she was deciding what to do with what she knew, and she wasn't ready to make that decision yet. And she had learned from an early age that words spoken before you were ready almost always cost more than the silence. Her mother had taught her that. Her mother, who had grown up in a world that made Marcus Harlow's network look like a neighborhood business, who had married into it and managed it, and eventually buried most of the men who had underestimated her, had told Elena when she was 12 years old, a woman who speaks before she's ready hands her opponent the weapon. Elena had carried that lesson like a second skeleton. So she went quiet. She went to her prenatal appointments alone. She cooked dinner and sat across from Marcus and listened to him talk about territory disputes and contract negotiations, and the slow deterioration of his alliance with the Fontaine family in the Northeast. And she said the right things at the right moments and gave nothing away. And she watched. She watched the way Marcus's phone angled away from her at the table. She watched him take calls in his car when he was already 10 feet from the front door. She watched the new shirts appear dramatically new, just slightly different. The choices of someone who had started thinking about how they appeared to another person's eyes. 6 days after she found the messages, she had a full picture. Cara Delacroix, 31. Previously worked in acquisitions for one of Marcus's subsidiary companies, terminated 8 months ago in a way that had not looked like termination. She had an apartment in the financial district that Marcus paid for through a holding company. Elena had to dig through 3 layers of shell accounts to find. She had a standing Tuesday dinner reservation at a restaurant Elena had been to exactly once on their second anniversary, when Marcus had called it her favorite place, even though she had never said that. Elena sat with all of this for 6 days, and then she drove to the hospital for her 32-week check and heard her daughter's heartbeat and held the ultrasound photo in her hand, and decided she wanted Marcus to hear it too. Not because she thought it would fix anything. She wasn't sure anymore what fixing would even look like. But because that was still her husband, and this was still his child, and she believed incorrectly, as it turned out that there was a version of this moment that could still be human. She drove home. She walked into his study. He was on his phone. He didn't look up. "I was just at the hospital," she said. 32 weeks. She held out the ultrasound photo. "She's Elena." He put the phone face down on the desk. Not because she mattered, because the conversation he was having required both hands. He looked at her, actually looked at her for the first time in a while, and his expression was the expression of a man doing math. "We need to talk about the situation." The situation. That was what her pregnancy had become in his mind. She could see it. "What situation?" she said, even though she knew. "This isn't a good time." He said it like he was talking about a business expansion. Like timing was the issue. He stopped, recalibrated. "There are things happening right now that complicate having a child in the picture." Elena's voice didn't change. He didn't flinch. That was what told her everything she needed to know about how long this had been going on, not the affair itself, but the fact that he said the name without flinching. He had stopped protecting her from it. He'd stopped feeling like it required protection. "Get rid of it," he said. "We can revisit the conversation in a year or two when things are more stable." She stood there for a moment with the ultrasound photo. Then she folded it, put it in her pocket, and left the room without a word. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed they still shared. She put one hand on her stomach and felt her daughter move a small rolling shift, like a question, and Elena made a decision. Not about leaving, not yet. She'd learned from her mother that leaving too early was as bad as leaving too late, and she wasn't ready, and there were things she needed to understand before she moved anywhere. She needed to understand what Marcus was actually afraid of. Because in 7 years with this man, Elena had learned one consistent truth about him. He didn't do anything simply. There was always something underneath. When he pushed someone away, there was always a reason that wasn't the reason he gave. When he said it wasn't a good time, there was always a specific threat that had made the timing feel dangerous. She needed to know what that threat was. She needed to know why, after 4 years of a marriage that had been but functional, he had started an affair 8 months ago and was now trying to eliminate his own child. She sat on the bed and thought about it, and the answer came to her slowly, the way the right answers usually did. 8 months ago. The same time Cara Delacroix's employment had been officially terminated. The same time Marcus had begun showing signs of pressure that Elena had attributed to the Fontaine problem in the Northeast. The same time 3 of Marcus's mid-level lieutenants had quietly, separately, requested meetings with his second-in-command, a man named Derek Souza, rather than with Marcus directly. She had noticed all of these things and filed them. She had a habit of filing things she couldn't yet explain. She stood up, walked to her closet, reached behind a row of hanging coats, and pulled out a small, fireproof lockbox that Marcus did not know existed. She'd kept it since before they were married, which said something about her instincts even then. Inside was a phone he had never seen, a set of account numbers, and a card with a name on it. The name was Vincent Voss, her uncle. She had not spoken to Vincent in 4 years. The last conversation they'd had was a disagreement about choices specifically, her choice to marry Marcus Harlow and step back from the Voss network entirely. Vincent had not accepted that gracefully. He had told her she was making a mistake. She had told him it was hers to make. They had not spoken since. She looked at the card for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and dialed. It rang 3 times, Elena. His voice was exactly the same. Older, maybe, but unmistakably her uncle, flat and precise, in the way of men who have learned that warmth is a currency you spend carefully. I wondered when you'd call. I need information, she said. Of course you do. There was no gloating in it, just recognition. What kind? Marcus is scared of something, she said. Something specific. Cara Delacroix is part of it. I need to know how. Silence on his end. She heard him breathing, the ambient sound of whatever room he was in, somewhere with hard floors, she thought. Marble, maybe. That name took me about 30 seconds to recognize, he said finally. Which tells you how far down I buried it. Tell me. Cara Delacroix's father is Thomas Delacroix. He controls freight infrastructure across the Gulf Corridor, the legal version of what Marcus does through other means. They've been in indirect competition for 3 years. Vincent paused. 8 months ago, Thomas Delacroix offered Marcus a merger. Not a partnership, a merger. His operation absorbs Harlow Logistics, and Marcus becomes a senior partner with a reduced position. Elena sat with that. Marcus refused. And 3 weeks after he refused, Thomas's daughter ended up in Marcus's bed. A pause. Whether she's there because her father sent her, or whether she's there for her own reasons, is a question I haven't been able to answer. You've been watching. I watch everything that touches family. It was the closest thing to an apology he would ever offer for the 4 years of silence. She didn't acknowledge it. There wasn't time. So Marcus is sleeping with the daughter of the man he's in a war with, she said. And now he wants me to terminate my pregnancy. The timing is interesting, Vincent said. The timing is not a coincidence. No, he agreed. It is not. She stood at the window of her closet and looked at the garden below the garden she had planted in their 2nd year, when she still believed in making permanent things. The roses were still blooming. She'd forgotten to have them cut back before winter, and they'd survived anyway, which had always irritated Marcus, who believed that things ought to behave according to schedule. Someone is pressuring him, she said, from inside. It's not just Delacroix. There's something closer. She said it as she thought it, letting the logic run. The meetings with Souza. The way Marcus has been moving money laterally, I noticed 3 transfers in the last 2 months that didn't route through his usual accounts. He's hiding something from someone inside his own organization. Vincent was quiet for a moment. You've been paying attention. I'm always paying attention, I know. His voice shifted, almost imperceptibly. Elena, I need you to hear me clearly. I'm listening. Whatever is happening inside the Harlow operation is more serious than a territorial dispute. I have heard things fragments, nothing firms, that suggest someone inside that organization is not waiting for Marcus to fail. They are engineering his failure. The word landed cleanly, without drama. Engineering? Who? She said. I don't know yet, but I will find out. He paused. Are you safe? She looked down at her stomach, felt her daughter move again, more insistent this time. A real kick, like a punctuation mark. For now, she said. For now is not good enough. It will have to be until I know what I'm dealing with. She made her voice flat. Don't do anything yet. Don't make any moves. I need him to believe everything is normal. He told you to end your pregnancy, Elena. I noticed what he said. And you're going to... I'm going to handle it, she said. My way. She heard him exhale, the specific exhale of a man who had argued with this woman before and knew that arguing further was a waste of his own time. And then finally said, but I'm stationing people outside the property. Don't argue. She didn't argue. She said goodbye and put the phone back in the lockbox and put the lockbox behind the coats and walked back to the edge of the bed and sat down. From downstairs, she could hear Marcus on his phone again. His voice was low and rhythmic, the tone he used when he was managing someone, when he was being deliberately calming, because the other person was frightened and he needed them not to be. She had heard that voice directed at her before. She realized she had no idea who he was managing now. That bothered her more than the affair, more than the thing he'd said about their daughter. The affair she had a shape for, the thing happening inside his organization that was a different problem, and it was her problem too, whether Marcus understood that or not. Because whatever was coming for him was living inside the same house as her child. She put both hands on her stomach and made herself breathe evenly. She was not a woman who panicked. She had been raised specifically not to panic, trained in it the way other children were trained to swim or play piano, a survival skill. Her mother had called it. The ability to remain calm while everything around you goes wrong is the only real power, she'd said. Anyone can be brave when things are fine. Elena had not needed that lesson to make sense until now. She started with what she knew. Marcus was scared. He was hiding money, and he was hiding it from someone inside his own organization, which meant he didn't trust his own people. He was involved willingly or not with Cara Delacroix, whose father was his rival. He had told his pregnant wife to terminate the pregnancy, which was either callousness or calculation, and she needed to know which. And someone was engineering his failure. She spent the rest of that night at the small desk in the corner of their bedroom, the one Marcus used to joke she never sat at, going through everything she had accumulated in 4 years of careful observation. Bank records she'd photographed on her personal phone. Conversations she'd logged in a notebook with no label on the cover. Names and dates and movements she had recorded the way her mother had taught her to record them, not because she expected to need them, but because you always needed what you thought you wouldn't. She was still at the desk when Marcus came upstairs at 11:30. He glanced at her. She was looking at her laptop, which displayed nothing more alarming than a prenatal nutrition website. You should sleep, he said. I will. He went into the bathroom. She waited until she heard the shower. Then she opened a different window on her laptop and sent a single message to an address she had memorized and never written down. Request confirmation on Sousa, timeline, and contacts. The reply came in 4 minutes, confirmed. Sousa's talking to Delacroix directly. 3 meetings in the last 6 weeks. Location data attached. Elena stared at the screen. Derek Sousa, Marcus's second in command. The man Marcus had trusted for 11 years. The man who had been the best man at their wedding. He had been meeting with Thomas Delacroix 3 times in the last 6 weeks. Marcus didn't know. She was certain he didn't know. If he knew Sousa would already be gone, Marcus was many things, but he was not slow to act on betrayal. Which meant Marcus was scared, and hiding money, and sleeping with his rival's daughter, and his closest lieutenant was secretly meeting with that same rival, and Marcus had no idea. She heard the shower shut off. She closed the window, opened the prenatal nutrition page, put her hands in her lap, and made sure they were still. The bathroom door opened. Marcus came out in a robe, toweling his hair. He looked tired. Not guilty, he was past the phase where guilt showed on him. Just tired. He looked at her, sitting at the desk, and something crossed his face, not quite regret. Closer to inconvenience, that feeling again, that she was a variable that had gotten complicated. Elena, he said. He sat on the edge of the bed about earlier. It's fine, she said. Her voice was exactly level. I understand you're under pressure. He looked at her for a moment. She could see him trying to read her. He'd always underestimated her poker face, which was an interesting mistake for an intelligent man to keep making. We'll figure it out, he said. She nodded. Of course we will. He lay down, turned off his lamp. She sat at the desk for another hour in the dark, going through the location data from Derek Souza's meetings. The third location was a restaurant she recognized. The same restaurant Marcus called her favorite place. The one with the Standing Tuesday reservation. The reservation that belonged to Cara Delacroix. Ineta sat with that for a long moment, feeling everything rearrange itself in her mind, the pieces that hadn't quite fit clicking into new positions, faster and then faster, until she could see the shape of the whole thing. It wasn't an affair, or it wasn't only an affair. Cara Delacroix wasn't Thomas Delacroix's daughter acting alone. She was sitting in a restaurant with Marcus's second-in-command. She was the connecting thread between two betrayals happening simultaneously, one from outside the Harlow operation and one from inside it. Someone had arranged all of this. Someone had put Cara in Marcus's path deliberately, had cultivated Souza's defection deliberately, had chosen the timing deliberately. The ask to terminate her pregnancy fit somewhere in this architecture, too, though she couldn't yet see exactly where. Someone wanted Marcus isolated, weakened, cut off from anything that might stabilize him, including her. She thought about Vincent's word again. Engineering. She put her hand on her stomach in the dark. Her daughter kicked back. Elena closed the laptop and sat in the silence of the room where her husband was sleeping 3 feet away, not knowing that his world was already in the process of being taken apart around him, and made herself think clearly about what came next. She was 7 months pregnant. She had limited time before the pregnancy itself became a variable that other people could use against her. She had information Marcus didn't have. She had resources he didn't know about. She had a network that went significantly deeper than his, and he had spent their entire marriage assuming she was the one who needed protecting. She did not feel anger about that. Not exactly. Anger was too simple. What she felt was the specific clarity of a woman who has finally finished deciding. She had come to this marriage in good faith. She had set aside her world for his. She had watched and waited and folded ultrasound photos into her pocket and said nothing, when saying everything would have been so much easier. She was done waiting to understand. She understood. Tomorrow she would call Vincent back. Tomorrow she would begin moving pieces into position. Tomorrow she would start the process of finding out exactly who had designed the trap her husband had walked them both into, and she would start deciding whether Marcus Harlow deserved to know she was. The one saving him before or after she was finished. She stood up from the desk, walked to the window. The garden was dark below, the roses she'd forgotten to cut back swaying slightly in the winter wind. Still alive, still blooming technically even in the wrong season. She put her fingertips against the cold glass. She was not her mother's daughter for nothing. And whoever had built this trap had made one critical mistake. They had built it around a woman they thought was silent because she had nothing to say. She called Vincent at 6 a.m. Not because she'd slept and woken up. Because she hadn't slept at all. And 6 o'clock was when Vincent's people started moving. And she needed them moving in specific directions before Marcus came downstairs for breakfast. Souza, she said the moment he picked up. I need everything. Who he's talked to, what he's moved, and when. Not summaries raw data. That'll take a day. Maybe 2. You have until tonight. Silence on his end. Then you found something. Cara Delacroix is meeting with Souza at the same restaurant Marcus thinks is her private arrangement. They've been in that room together at least 3 times. She kept her voice low, her back to the bedroom door. This isn't a love affair that complicated a business rivalry. Someone built this. Someone put every piece in place and then wound it up and let it run. Vincent didn't respond immediately. She heard him set something down, a cup, maybe. The small domestic sound of a man recalibrating. How certain are you, he said. Certain enough to call you at 6 a.m. All right. His voice shifted into the register she remembered from childhood, the one that meant the social portion of the conversation was over. I'll have people on Souza by 8. But Elena, I need you to tell me something honestly. What? Is there any version of this where Marcus is involved in his own takedown? where he knows what Souza is doing and is using it for something. She thought about it. She gave it a real 10 seconds of honest consideration, because that was the kind of question that deserved 10 seconds. No, she said, he's scared. Men who are engineering their own situations don't look the way he looks right now. He's not in control of this, which means he's the target, not the architect. Yes, which makes you the only person who knows that. She didn't answer because the answer was obvious, and Vincent didn't need to hear it. Be careful, he said. It came out rough, like it cost him something. I mean that. She hung up, put the phone in the lockbox. Put the lockbox away. Then she went downstairs and made coffee, and set a cup on the counter for Marcus and waited. He came down at 7:15, already dressed, already in the closed-off mode he operated in when his mind was somewhere else entirely. He picked up the coffee, without acknowledging it, stewed at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone, with the particular tension in his jaw that she'd learned to read like weather. She said, She sat down at the kitchen table with her own cup, and the prenatal vitamins she took every morning with breakfast. She arranged them on the table with the deliberate casualness of someone who had nothing to hide and nothing to worry about. She ate half a piece of toast. She looked out the window. She was watching him in her peripheral vision the entire time. He put the phone face down on the counter, rubbed the back of his neck, picked up his coffee, put it down, picked up the phone again. Something had happened since last night, or something was about to happen, and he knew it. I need to go to the site office today, he said. I might be late. That's fine. He looked at her then. Really looked. The way he used to in the early years, like he was trying to figure out what was underneath the surface of whatever she presented. She met his eyes and gave him nothing. You're not, he stopped. Not what? He shook his head slightly. Nothing. He picked up his jacket from the back of the stool. Don't wait up. He left. She listened the front door close. Listened to his car start and pull out of the drive. Then she put down her coffee cup and got to work. She spent the morning on the phone that Marcus didn't know about, working through 3 different contacts that her uncle maintained in the Northeast people who moved in the same freight and logistics world as Thomas Delacroix and could speak to his recent movements, without knowing they were speaking to Elena specifically. She was careful. She had learned caution from people who had needed it for survival. What she assembled by noon was not a complete picture, but it was enough. Thomas Delacroix had not sent his daughter to Marcus's bed. She was increasingly certain of that, because the timeline didn't work. Kara's introduction to Marcus had happened through a professional context, a dinner that Marcus's own team had arranged, which meant the access point had been inside the Harlow organization, not outside it. Thomas Delacroix was opportunistic, not strategic in the way this required. He would exploit an opening, but he hadn't created this one. Someone else had created it. Someone who had access to Marcus's schedule. Someone who could arrange dinners and frame introductions and manufacture proximity without Marcus ever questioning the logistics. She wrote down 4 names, people who operated at that level inside the Harlow organization. People who had been in place long enough and were trusted enough to move those pieces. She crossed off 3 of them by 2 o'clock, using records she'd accumulated over 4 years of watching a world she wasn't supposed to be watching. The 4th name she sat with, Raymond Holt, not Souza. She'd been wrong about Souza, or not wrong, but incomplete. Souza was meeting with Delacroix, yes, but Souza was a follower, not an architect. Souza moved in the direction that someone told him was safe to move. And the person who had been telling him things, the person who sat close enough to Marcus to shape his information, to curate what he saw and what he didn't, was Raymond Holt. Marcus's head of internal operations, his fixer, the man who had been with the Harlow family for 16 years, since before Marcus took over from his father. The man who knew every structure, every alliance, every protected relationship and exposed nerve inside the organization. The man who had, now that she looked at it directly, been the one to arrange the dinner where Marcus first met Cara Delacroix. Elena sat at her desk with this information and felt something she could only describe as a kind of cold clarity, the feeling of a thing that was always true becoming visible. She picked up her phone, not the hidden one, her regular phone. She called Marcus. It rang 5 times. He picked up on the 6th, which meant he'd considered not answering. "What is it?" he said. Not unfriendly, not warm. The middle register he used when she was an obligation he was managing. Raymond Holt, she said. Silence. What about him? Marcus said. His voice had changed, fractionally, but she heard it. When did he last review your internal accounts? His voice dropped. This is not a conversation to have on the phone. Then tell me to come to the site office. A pause. What do you know? Tell me to come. Another pause. Longer this time. She could hear something in the background voices, the ambient sound of a room with several people in it, and then the sound of a door closing as he moved somewhere more private. What do you know? He said again, quieter. The question was different now. Less defensive. More like a man who had been waiting for someone else to say something out loud. I know enough, she said, and I know you've suspected something for longer than you've admitted, because you've been moving money through accounts that don't appear in the standard reporting structure, which means you stop trusting your own reporting structure, which means you stop trusting someone attached to it. The silence lasted long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Don't come here, he said finally. Tonight, I'll be home by 8. She said fine. She hung up. She sat for a moment. Then she put her hand on her stomach and breathed. Her daughter was still. Resting, maybe. Or just waiting. The way Elena had been waiting with impatience, that other people always mistook for something else. Marcus came home at 7:45, 14 minutes earlier than he'd said, which meant he'd left the site office shortly after her call had been unable to wait, which was information in itself. She was in the sitting room when he walked in. Not staged, she'd been sitting there because it was where she'd ended up, tired in the way that 7 months pregnant tired felt, which was different from any other tired she'd ever known. She had a glass of water and a book she hadn't been reading. He stood in the doorway for a moment, still in his coat, looking at her. Holt has access to everything, he said. Not a question, not a greeting. Yes, she said. He came into the room, sat down across from her, not beside her, across the distance he maintained without seeming to notice he was maintaining it. He put his elbows on his knees. How long have you known? He said. I put it together this morning. How? I've been watching, she said. Simply, no elaboration. He stared at her. She watched something move through his face, not quite shame, but its more uncomfortable cousin. The recognition of a thing you've been wrong about for a long time. It counts, he said. You found those 3 months ago. His jaw tightened. You didn't say anything. I didn't know what they meant yet. She met his eyes. Now I do. Tell me. She laid it out cleanly. Holt's access, the dinner arrangement, the pattern of introductions she'd traced. The way Souza's meetings with Delacroix followed the timeline of Holt's internal reports, always after a report, never before, which meant Souza was being briefed from inside before going out. The shell accounts that mapped, if you looked carefully, to a holding structure that wasn't Harlow and wasn't Delacroix, but existed in the space between them. Marcus listened without interrupting. That was unusual for him. He was a man who corrected mid-sentence, who completed people's points before they finished making them. He sat still and listened to her, and she watched his face go through something complicated. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. He's been with my family for 16 years, he said. I know, my father trusted him. I know that too. Marcus stood up, walked to the window, stood with his back to her, and she watched his shoulders the way they held the weight of something he hadn't wanted to be true. If I move on him now, he said, and I'm wrong, you're not wrong. Elena, he turned. If I'm wrong, I destroy the most reliable internal structure I have left. Half my captains defer to Holt's assessments before they defer to mine. If I pull him and I can't prove it, I can prove it. He stopped. The holding structure, she said. It routes through 2 intermediaries before it resolves. I have the routing. I have the account identifiers. She held his gaze. I need 48 more hours to build a chain that holds in a room full of people who want to believe it doesn't. Marcus looked at her the way he hadn't looked at her in years. Like she was someone he hadn't fully seen before. Like he was making a calculation that required revising assumptions he'd held for a long time. You've been doing this, he said slowly, the whole time. Not the whole time, she said. I started paying attention more seriously about a year ago, when the quality of your threat assessments started changing. Changing how? They became less accurate. You were getting information that was just slightly off, not wrong enough to be obvious, but consistently tilted. It was steering your decisions in ways that were small, individually. But the cumulative drift was significant. He stood there, and she could see him running the last year back, through this new understanding. Replaying decisions. She watched him reach the point where it started to hurt. The Fontaine negotiation, he said quietly. Yes. I walked away from that because my assessment said they were going to renege. The assessment was manipulated. He put one hand on the wall beside the window. Not leaning on it, gripping it. She knew that gesture. It meant he was controlling something he didn't want to show. That cost me 2 territories, he said, and created space for the Delacroix network to move into them. He didn't say anything for a moment. She let the silence sit. Kara, he said finally. Elena didn't react. She kept her face neutral, though something tightened in her chest, not jealousy, exactly. More like grief. The grief of watching someone finally understand something you already understood completely. She wasn't your idea, Elena said. You felt like she was. But she wasn't. Marcus came back from the window. Sat down again, not across from her this time. He sat closer, in the chair beside the couch, and leaned forward with his head in his hands for a moment. Just a moment. Then he straightened. I owe you, he started. Don't, she said, evenly, not now. That's a different conversation, and this isn't the time for it. He looked at her sharply. I need you focused, she said. We have 48 hours to build something that actually holds before Holt realizes you know. Because the moment he thinks you know, he runs. Or he accelerates, depending on how close he is to whatever the endgame looks like. She paused. And I don't think we know the endgame yet. Marcus held her gaze. What do you think it is? I think Holt isn't doing this for Delacroix, she said. I think Delacroix is a component, a way to introduce external pressure while Holt manages the internal erosion. But the thing Holt wants at the end of this, she stopped. Chose her words. That's what I haven't found yet. He wants to run it, Marcus said, flat, certain. He's been waiting for this for years. My father never gave him what he thought he'd earned. I didn't either. He exhaled through his nose. 16 years and he still thinks like a man who got passed over. Then he's more dangerous than someone just doing this for money. I know. They sat in the room together, and the house was quiet around them. The house that was also a fortress that Marcus had built to be impenetrable from the outside, without understanding that the only dangers that ever mattered came from inside. Elena looked at him. At the man she'd married and spent years trying to understand, who had spent those same years systematically failing to understand her, who had said 3 words to her yesterday that she hadn't forgiven and wasn't going to pretend she had. She was helping him because her daughter lived inside this situation. She was helping him because the threat to Marcus was a threat to everything around Marcus, including her, including a child who hadn't asked to be born into this. She was not helping him because the marriage was intact, or because she believed in a version of this story that ended simply. She knew what she was doing. She had always known what she was doing. Get some sleep, she said. I mean that. You're running on fear right now, and fear makes mistakes. He looked at her like he wanted to say something else. Something that fell in the category of the other conversation, the one she'd told him, wasn't for now. She watched him decide against it. Thank you, he said instead. She nodded, that was all. He went upstairs. She stayed in the sitting room for another hour, the book still in her lap, unread, going over the routing structure in her mind, the chain she needed to build, the 2 intermediaries she needed to identify, the way she was going to have to move through, people she hadn't used in 4 years, without letting any of them know what she was assembling. Her phone, the hidden one, retrieved from upstairs while Marcus showered, vibrated. A message from one of Vincent's people. Holt meeting confirmed 11 p.m. tonight. Location, Harbor Storage Facility, Pier 7. Souza present. Third party unknown. Elena read it twice. Tonight. Not in 48 hours. Tonight. Holt wasn't waiting anymore. Something had shifted, something that made tonight necessary. She didn't know what had triggered it, but her instinct said Marcus's behavior had changed in some way that Holt had noticed. A call Marcus had made, a meeting he'd avoided, something small that had read wrong. She typed back, "Who is the third party?" The response came in 90 seconds. Working on it. Facial recognition running. ETA 20 minutes. She stood up, walked to the bottom of the stairs, listened. She could hear the shower running upstairs. Marcus was still up, still moving. She went back to the sitting room, waited. 17 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. She looked at the name on the screen. Her first reaction was physical, a coldness that started in her chest and moved out through her arms. Not fear, exactly. The body's response to something that changes the shape of everything. The third party at the pier was not someone from Delacroix's network. It was not a rival captain or a financial intermediary, or any of the players she'd been tracking. It was a man named Walter Price, Federal Task Force, Organized Crime Division. Holt wasn't just engineering a takeover. He was engineering a prosecution. He was going to hand Marcus to federal investigators. And with Marcus gone, Holt walks into the vacuum with clean enough hands that he can reframe the organization, reframe the liability, reframe everything. The scope of it hit her. All at once, the full architecture visible now in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. This wasn't a betrayal for money or power alone. This was the kind of betrayal that ends in someone spending the rest of their life in a federal prison. The kind that doesn't leave a way back. Marcus didn't have 48 hours. He might not have 48 minutes. She stood up and went to the stairs and called his name. Not loudly, but with enough weight that he heard it through the ceiling. The shower turned off. "Come down," she said, "right now." She heard him moving, heard the bathroom door, heard his footsteps on the stairs. He appeared at the top, still damp, a towel around his shoulders, and looked down at her face. Whatever he saw in it made him take the stairs fast. "What happened?" he said. She held up the phone. Let him read the name. She watched the blood leave his face. "Price," he said. The word came out like something had punched it out of him. "Holt is meeting him tonight. Pier 7, 11 o'clock. She kept her voice steady. "He's not building a takeover. He's building a case." Marcus stared at the screen. She watched him process it, the speed of it, the completeness of the betrayal, 16 years compressing into a single name on a phone screen. "If Price already has a meeting scheduled," Marcus said slowly, "then Holt has already given him something. Something substantial enough to warrant a direct contact." "Yes, which means there's already a file." "Yes." He looked up from the phone. His eyes were different now, not the controlled, managed expression he usually wore. Something rawer. Something she hadn't seen since the bathroom at 3 a.m. in the first year of their marriage, when everything was broken and he hadn't figured out yet how to hide that from her. "How bad?" he said. "I don't know yet what he's given them," she said. "But Holt has been inside your operation for 16 years. He has documentation you don't even know exists." Marcus sat down on the bottom stair. Just sat down right there, which was so unlike him, so uncontrolled, so unposed, that it told her more about the state of him than anything he could have said. She stood in front of him, pregnant, tired, carrying information that had just gotten significantly heavier. "I can stop the meeting," she said. "Tonight, I have people who can get to that pier before 11. He looked up. "But if I do that," she said, "Holt knows within 24 hours that the meeting was intercepted. And the moment he knows, whatever he's already given Price becomes the foundation of an independent investigation that doesn't need Holt anymore to proceed." She paused. "So stopping the meeting only works if we simultaneously remove Holt's credibility as a source. And to do that, we need the chain," he said. "We need the chain. Complete tonight." He looked at her for a long moment. "Elena," he said. Not the managing tone, not the distracted tone. Just her name, with something honest in it. "I need to ask you something." "Ask, why are you still doing this?" His voice was low. "After what I said yesterday." After he stopped. "Why?" She looked at him. She didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer was complicated, and she didn't have the time or the energy to be dishonest. "Because she is my daughter," she said finally. "She doesn't get to be born into a federal prosecution." She held his gaze. "That is the only reason I'm telling you right now. Do you understand me?" He held her gaze for a long moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "I understand. Good." She straightened. "Then get dressed. We have work to do, and we have about 4 hours to do it." He stood up. She watched him put on the expression she recognized, the one that wasn't fear anymore, that had converted fear into forward motion, because that was what he knew how to do. That was the one skill she had always genuinely respected in him, even when everything else was eroding. He went upstairs. She stood at the bottom of the stairs with her hand on the railing and felt her daughter move low and insistent and alive, and allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of something that was not quite fear and not quite calm, but lived in the space between them. Then she picked up her phone and called Vincent and said, "Clear your night." And the thing that had been set in motion long before either of them understood, it was fully visible at last, all its machinery, all its weight, all the damage it was capable of, and there was no stepping back from what came next. Vincent answered on the first ring. "I heard," he said. "How?" "My person at the pier sent a secondary confirmation 20 minutes ago. Price is already there. He arrived early, which means this meeting was scheduled to happen with or without Holt's final confirmation." Vincent's voice was tight, not panicked. The tightness of a man compressing a large amount of information into a very small space. "Elena, if Price is already on site, he didn't come alone." She understood what he wasn't saying. "Surveillance. Minimum. Which means anyone who goes near that pier in the next 3 hours goes into a federal record." She turned away from the stairs, moved to the far side of the sitting room, lowering her voice further. "Can you get me inside the routing chain without physical contact at the pier?" "The chain. Yes. But tell me what you need." "I need the second intermediary's account identifier. The first one I can trace from what you already sent me. But the second node, that's the one that ties Holt directly. Without it, the chain is circumstantial." She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. The second intermediary was the piece she hadn't been able to confirm. She'd built her assumptions around a holding company registered in Delaware, a shell inside a shell, the kind of trust structure that existed specifically to resist this kind of unspooling. "Give me 30 minutes, she said. "You have less than 4 hours before that meeting concludes, and Holt runs or escalates. Whatever he hands Price tonight becomes the core of the federal record. After that, it doesn't matter what chain we build it, becomes defense evidence, not offense." "I know." She was already moving toward the stairs. 30 minutes. She took the stairs faster than she should have, at this stage of the pregnancy, one hand on the railing, and found Marcus in the bedroom pulling on a dark shirt, his face set in the particular way that meant he had already organized his fear into something more useful. "I need the Delaware shell," she said. He turned. "Which one?" "The one Holt uses for internal disbursements. Not the one in the quarterly reports, the one underneath it." She watched his face. "You knew it existed." "I knew there was a secondary structure for operational discretionary funds." He said it carefully, the way a man says something he's been not saying for a while. "I didn't look too hard at the specifics because Holt told me it was a liability buffer." "Tax architecture." "It's not tax architecture." No, he picked up his phone. "I have one document, an origination filing from 3 years ago. I kept it because something felt wrong and I didn't know what yet." He scrolled. Found it. Turned the phone toward her. She looked at it. "Read the account identifier at the bottom of the filing, a 12-digit string that would mean nothing to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at." She had seen string before. Not in any document Marcus had shown her. Not in anything she'd built in the last 48 hours. She had seen it in her uncle's records, 4 years ago, before she'd walked away from the Voss network entirely. A routing identifier that had appeared in a disbursement chain connected to a freight intermediary in the Gulf Corridor. The same Gulf Corridor that Thomas Delacroix controlled. The coldness came back. "Deeper this time, Marcus," she said slowly. "This account is 4 years old. The filing is from 3 years ago, but the account predates the filing by at least a year. Probably more." She kept her voice even. She needed to stay even. "Holt didn't build this structure in response to the Delacroix merger offer. He built it before the merger offer existed." Marcus stared at her. "This has been running for at least 5 years, she said. She watched him do the math, watched him count back 5 years to wherever he'd been, whatever he'd trusted, every decision that had looked like his own. "My father," he said. The word came out stripped of everything. No anger yet. Just the impact. "I don't know yet," she said. "But if this structure is 5 years old, it was running during the transition. When your father stepped back." Marcus sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't crash into it, he sat, with a terrible deliberateness, like a man setting down something too heavy to hold standing up. "My father's transition took 14 months, he said. Holt managed most of the operational continuity during that period. Every account review, every personnel confirmation." He stopped. "My father trusted him completely. I know." If Holt was building this during the transition, he stopped again. His jaw was tight. The muscle at the corner of it pulsed once. "He wasn't taking from me. He was taking from my father first." "Yes." And my father never found out. She didn't answer because the answer was in the room without needing words. Marcus stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a moment, and she let him have that moment, because what he was working through wasn't something she could shortcut. Call your uncle, he said finally. Tell him what we have. And tell him I need to know if the Voss network has ever had contact with this account structure. She was quiet. He turned. I know who your family is, Elena. His voice was flat, not accusatory. Flat in the way of a man who has spent a long time building a wall around a truth and has just decided to stop. I've always known. I didn't say anything because he exhaled. Because I told myself it didn't matter. That you'd chosen a different life. I had, I know. He held her gaze. But right now I'm asking you to use what you know. Whatever that looks like. She nodded once. Picked up the hidden phone. Dialed. Vincent picked up before the first ring finished. The Delaware identifier, she said. 12 digits. I'm sending it now. She texted it as she spoke. Tell me if you've seen it before. Silence. She heard him move the sound of a keyboard, rapid and precise. 20 seconds, he said. She waited. Marcus stood at the window, still, watching the dark garden below. Elena. Vincent's voice had changed. Where did you get this? From a filing in Marcus's possession. Why? Because this account appears in our records. A pause. Not as a Delacroix-connected structure, as a Voss-connected structure. The room tilted slightly, or felt like it did. Say that again, she said. This routing identifier ran through a Voss intermediary in year one of its existence. Whoever built it used Voss infrastructure as one of the layering points. Which means, he stopped, which means whoever built it had access to Voss internal routing architecture, she said. Yes, which is not public information, no. It is very much not public information. His voice was careful now. Careful in the way he got when he was managing his own reaction. Elena. I need to think about who inside this network would have had access to that level of routing detail 4 or 5 years ago. Her stomach dropped. Not the baby. Her stomach. The cold, sudden drop of a realization arriving before she was ready for it. Vincent, she said. Give me a minute, Vincent. She said it harder. Who inside the Voss network was in contact with Raymond Holt 4 years ago? Silence. Long enough that Marcus turned from the window to look at her. There was a period, Vincent said slowly, when we were exploring a possible infrastructure alignment with several external logistics operators. It didn't move forward. But during the exploratory phase, I authorized a limited disclosure of routing architecture to 3 external parties. Was Holt one of them? Silence. He was not represented as Holt, Vincent said. He was represented as an independent freight consultant, operating under a different name. A pause. I had no reason to, she said. I believe so. Yes. She stood in the middle of the bedroom with the phone at her ear and felt the full weight of it settle. Holt had gotten inside the Voss routing architecture by misrepresenting himself to her uncle 4 years ago. Had used that access to build a layering structure that tied a Harlow account to a Voss pathway, which meant if the chain was ever exposed, it would look like the Harlow and Voss networks were operating in coordination. It would look like Elena's family and Marcus's family were financially linked, which would give a federal investigator reason to look at both. He wasn't just building a case against Marcus, she said. She said it out loud in the room for Marcus to hear. He was building a case against my family too. Marcus went very still. If Price opens this chain, she said, it doesn't end with Marcus. It ends with the Voss network implicated as a co-structure. Federal jurisdiction across multiple states, my uncle. Possibly she stopped. Possibly her. Her name was on Voss documents. She had stepped back 4 years ago, but stepping back didn't erase history. Elena, Vincent said. His voice was stripped down to its base material, now no management, no careful framing. Just her uncle talking to her like she was a child he was genuinely frightened for. This is not a situation we can handle quietly, not anymore. I know. If Price takes what Holt gives him tonight. I know, Vincent. You need to be out of that house. Tonight. Right now. Whatever is about to happen to Marcus Harlow's operation, you cannot be inside it when it... I'm not leaving, she said. Silence. Elena, I am 7 months pregnant and my name is in this chain, and leaving the house does not remove me from the legal architecture that Holt built. The only thing that removes me is dismantling the chain before Price gets it. She kept her voice level. Absolutely level. So tell me what you need from me, And let's stop spending time on conversations that are already finished. A long pause. Then Vincent said, with something that sounded like it physically hurt him, I need 40 minutes to reroute through the intermediary record and build a counter-documentation trail. But I need you to do something on your end simultaneously. What? Holt has a physical archive, not digital. Paper. The kind of man who spent 16 years inside someone else's organization knows that digital chains can be broken. He'll have a physical backup, something that exists outside any network I can reach. Vincent's voice was precise now. Operational. If Price gets that physical archive along with tonight's disclosure, the counter-documentation doesn't matter. Paper doesn't get rerouted. She already knew where the conversation was going. Where would he keep it? Marcus said from across the room. He'd heard enough. She didn't stop him. Not at his home, Elena said. Too obvious. Not at the site office Marcus's people have access. She looked at Marcus. Where does Holt go when he goes off the official schedule? Marcus thought for exactly 3 seconds. He has a property. Not in his name. I only know about it because I ran a secondary check on all my people's assets 2 years ago and found a shell ownership that connected back to him through a trust. He moved to his desk, opened a drawer, found a physical notebook, the kind no one used anymore, and flipped to a page near the back. Read an address. She repeated it to Vincent. I know that area, Vincent said. I can have someone there in 25 minutes. Tell them to look for anything physical, files, drives, anything that looks like it was compiled systematically. She paused. And tell them to be invisible. If Holt has any kind of alert on that property and it trips, we lose everything. Understood. She hung up, looked at Marcus. 25 minutes, she said. And then we know whether we have anything to work with. Marcus looked at the notebook in his hand, closed it, set it on the desk. Why did you keep that? She said. The address. The secondary check. Because Holt is the best operator I've ever worked with, Marcus said quietly. And the best operators are the most dangerous when they decide to stop being yours. He set the notebook down. I kept it the same reason you keep things. Because you don't always know what something is worth until later. She looked at him for a moment. The man she had married, standing in the bedroom of the house they'd built together, holding information he'd had for 2 years and never used. You suspected him, she said. Not accusatory, just true. I suspected the possibility. He met her eyes. It's not the same thing. No, she said, it's not. She sat down, not because she chose to her body made the decision. The weight of the pregnancy and the night and the thing they were inside of all landed at once, and she sat on the edge of the chair near the window and breathed. Marcus came to her, stopped 2 feet away, didn't touch her, seemed to understand that touching was not a thing she was offering right now, but crouched down so he was at eye level, which he never did. Marcus Harlow did not lower himself physically. It was a pride thing, a posture thing, a thing she had noticed in the first year and catalogued without comment. He was doing it now. Tell me what you need from me, he said. Not what the operation needs. What do you need? She looked at him. I need you to sit with the fact, she said slowly, that whatever happens in the next 3 hours, whether we stop this or we don't, there are things between us that exist completely separately from tonight. And I need you to not confuse the two. His jaw tightened. Elena, what you said yesterday, she said, about our daughter. That doesn't go away, because you're looking at me differently tonight. He held her gaze. He didn't defend himself. She'd half expected him to. He was a man who defended, who framed, who built arguments the way other men built walls. He didn't do any of that. I know, he said. Good, she said. Then we understand each other. She stood up. He stood up with her, and they were close for a moment, the closest they'd been in months that felt real rather than performed. And then her phone vibrated, and the moment closed itself off. She looked at the screen. Vincent's person at Holt's property, she answered. Tell me, she said. The voice on the other end was young, contained the specific flatness of someone trained to report without editorializing. Property is clean on the surface. No active security alerts triggered. I'm inside. A pause. There's a room, interior, no windows. What's in it? A longer pause. She heard paper moving. Files, the voice said. A lot of files and something else. Another pause longer, with the particular quality of someone trying to figure out how to say something. There's a folder marked with your name. She went still. My name, she said. Elena Harlow. It's thick. Photos, documents, what looks like financial records. A pause. and something that looks like a medical file. The floor didn't move but felt like it did. A medical file, she said. I can't read the specifics from here, but it's flagged. There's a handwritten note on the front. A pause. It says, in case she becomes a problem. She heard Marcus say her name from across the room, heard the question in it without hearing the words clearly, because her ears were doing something strange, the sound in the room going slightly muffled the way it did under extreme pressure. She had been in his files for years. Holt had been building a file on her. Not just on Marcus, on her. Medical information, financial records. The medical file. She thought about the miscarriage in the first year. The hospital records. The paperwork she'd signed that had gone into a system that Holt, with his access to Marcus's operational infrastructure, could have reached if he'd known to look. Or the prenatal records from this pregnancy. Or something older. Something from before the marriage, from her history with the Voss network, that would look very different to a federal investigator than it looked in context. Photograph everything, she said. Her voice was steady. She didn't know how. Every page. Send it all. Yes, ma'am. She lowered the phone, looked at Marcus. He's had a file on me since before we were married, she said. Holt has been building a parallel case, not just against you, against me. Marcus's expression went through something she didn't have a word for. It landed somewhere past anger, somewhere in the territory of a man confronting the specific horror of a betrayal that implicated not just himself. Elena, he was protecting himself, she said. She said it out loud because saying it helped her think it through. If you ever found out about the chain and moved on him, he needed leverage. Something that would make you stop. Something that would make you weigh the cost of exposing him against the cost to someone she stopped. She'd almost said someone you love. She didn't know if that was still the right word. She didn't have time to find out. He used you as an insurance policy against me, Marcus said. His voice was very quiet. The quiet that in Marcus Harlow meant the furthest point from calm. Yes, and if I'd moved on him without knowing, he would have shown you the file. She held his gaze. And you would have stopped. Because whatever is in that medical file, whatever records he has from my history with my family, it would have looked like I was the problem. Like I was the one who couldn't be trusted. Marcus stared at her. She watched the architecture of the last 7 years rearrange itself behind his eyes every time he doubted her, every report that had made her seem unstable or disloyal or politically complicated. Every piece of information that had come to him through Holt's hands. He's been feeding you material about me, she said. For years. Marcus closed his eyes, opened them. Yes. That's why you started treating me like I was. She stopped herself. There was a word she wanted to use, and it was too accurate and too painful, and this was not the moment for it. Like you were the liability, he said. He said it for her. Flat, unflinching. The specific self-indictment of a man who can no longer avoid a true thing. Every time I pulled back from you. Every time the things I said. Yesterday. He stopped. Holt shaped how I saw you. Not all of it, she said, because fairness mattered to her even now. You made your own choices, too. I know, but yes, she said. He shaped the frame, she exhaled, which is why the file on me is the most dangerous piece. Because if Price gets it alongside the chain, I become a co-defendant in a federal case built on falsified context. She held his gaze. And I'm 7 months pregnant. The words landed in the room and stayed there. Marcus picked up his phone. His hand was not entirely steady. She noticed that. In 7 years, she had never seen his hands unsteady. I need to call someone, he said. Who? Someone who can get to Pier 7 before 11 without showing up in a federal record. He looked at her. Someone completely outside my organization. Marcus, she said it carefully. If you reach outside the organization right now, Holt will know within. Not this person. His voice was certain. This is someone Holt has never touched. Never had access to. Because I kept them completely separate from everything Holt managed. He paused. Because I suspected the possibility. Like I said. She looked at him. Who? She said. And she saw some things in his face she hadn't expected, something that looked like the specific shame of a man who protected the right things for the wrong reasons, who had kept one clean hand in reserve without ever admitting to himself why. Her name is Diana Marsh, he said. She runs security consultation for 3 of my legitimate subsidiaries. Holt has no file on her, no contact with her operation. He paused. I kept her clean. I didn't want Holt near her because I didn't want... He stopped. I didn't want one particular person I trusted to be in his hands. You trusted her, Elena said, just the words. Flat. Professionally. He met her eyes. It was professional. She looked at him for a long moment, decided she believed him, not because she was naive, but because his shame was the wrong shape for a lie. It was the shame of a man who had protected a professional asset by keeping it secret from his wife, which was its own kind of wrong, just not the kind she'd first thought. Call her, Elena said. He dialed. 2 rings. A woman's voice, brisk, alert, the voice of someone who answered late-night calls without needing context. Marcus. Diana. Pier 7, I need eyes on a federal agent named Walter Price and I need it clean. He looked at Elena as he said the next part. And I need Raymond Holt's access to that meeting disrupted. Whatever it takes. A pause. How dirty can I get? Diana said. Not dirty. Just complicated. I need the meeting delayed long enough to make it useless. He paused. Can you do that in under 2 hours, probably? The word had weight. It'll cost you, I know. Then yes, Diana said. I'll call you when it's done. She hung up. Marcus lowered the phone. They stood in the bedroom with the clock running and the photographs from Holt's property loading on Elena's phone, one by one images of her own medical history, her own financial past, her own name written in someone else's handwriting, on a folder marked as contingency. Her phone buzzed. Vincent. Counter documentation is 60% complete, he said. But Elena, I found something in the routing trace. Tell me. The account structure Holt built it doesn't just route through a VOS intermediary. It routes through a VOS intermediary that was active for 11 months, and then closed. A pause. It closed 4 years ago, the same month you left the network and married Marcus. She understood what he was saying before he finished. He timed it deliberately, she said. He used the VOS routing pathway while it was active, and then let it close naturally when I left. So the chain would look like you established the connection before you left, Vincent said. Like the infrastructure was your contribution to a joint operation between the Harlow and VOS networks. His voice was very careful. If a federal investigator reads this chain without our counter documentation, Elena, the story it tells is that you built the bridge between the 2 operations before you married into one of them. She sat back down, not because her body forced it this time, because she needed to be sitting. He didn't just use me as insurance against Marcus, she said. No, Vincent said. He built a story where I'm the architect of the whole thing, she said. Where I came into this marriage as an agent of the VOS network. Where everything that followed was a coordinated operation between 2 criminal families, with me as the connecting point. Yes, Vincent said. She sat with it, the full scope of it. The thing Holt had spent years building, patient and precise, using her own history as the raw material. If that story lands in a federal file tonight, she said, it doesn't matter what we build afterward. The narrative is set. Yes, she looked up at Marcus. He had heard enough. His face was the face of a man who has run out of places to put what he's feeling. He didn't just want to take my operation, Marcus said. His voice came out stripped. He wanted to destroy you to do it. He wanted to destroy both of us, she said. He just needed me destroyed first, so that when you fell, there was no one left who understood enough to stop it. The room was very quiet. Her phone loaded the last photograph from Holt's property. A document, stamped with a date from 3 years ago. She read it once. Her vision blurred slightly, not tears, just the physical response to extreme, sustained pressure, and she blinked it clear and read it again. It was a letter, written by Holt to someone whose name was redacted, laying out the complete plan, every component, every timeline. And at the bottom, a single line that made everything else irrelevant. Once the Harlow transition is complete and the federal case is closed, the child, if there is one, becomes the complication we'll need to address separately. She read that line 3 times. Then she put the phone face down on her knee and sat very still, and breathed through something that was not panic and was not rage, but was the specific, bone-deep thing that happens to a woman when someone has written her unborn child into a contingency plan. Marcus was watching her face. What is it? She picked up the phone, held it out to him. He read it. She watched the color leave his face completely, then watched it come back not as warmth, but as something much colder. The kind of cold that in Marcus Harlow meant the decision was already made. Where is Holt right now? He said. We don't know exactly. He's not at the pier yet. Marcus said. His voice had gone to a place she'd never heard before. Below anger. Below strategy. He never arrives early to anything. He always comes in last because he believes in reading a room before he enters it. He was already moving toward the closet. Which means we have a window, Marcus. She stood. If you go at him directly before we have the chain complete. I'm not going at him directly. He turned. His eyes were different. She'd married this man and spent 7 years beside him, and she had not seen this specific thing in them before. I'm going to find out who else knows about my daughter. She looked at him. That letter was written to someone, he said. Someone whose name is redacted, and I need to know who that is before tonight ends. She thought about the letter, the careful administrative language of a man laying out a plan to someone who had the authority to approve or reject it. Someone Holt reported to. She had been so focused on Holt as the architect that she had not fully considered whether Holt might also be a component. He's not the top of this, she said. No, Marcus said. He said it like he'd known it for a while. He's not. She stood in the middle of the bedroom where she had slept and not slept, and watched her marriage deteriorate for years, and felt the ground shift underneath everything she thought she'd understood about the shape of what they were inside. Holt was not the architect, which meant everything they'd built in the last 4 hours was pointed at the wrong person. And somewhere out there, the person who had designed all of it, who had been patient enough to spend years building a case using her history, her family, her unborn child as raw material, was waiting for 11 o'clock. The name came from Vincent at 9:47, not a message. A call. Vincent didn't call when he could message. He called when the information was too large to contain in his textet, when saying it out loud was the only way to make it real. Arthur Vane, Vincent said. Elena didn't recognize it immediately. She ran it. 3 seconds of running it through everything she'd accumulated, every name she'd filed in 4 years of watching. Then she had it. Arthur Vane, 71 years old. Publicly a private equity investor, with interests in infrastructure and freight logistics. Privately the man who had funded the original Harlow operation 30 years ago, who had backed Marcus's father when Marcus's father was nobody, when the Harlow name meant nothing and needed capital to become something. The man who had made the Harlow empire possible, and who had, apparently, decided he wanted it back. He's been Holt's primary contact for at least 7 years, Vincent said. His voice was taut. I found the connection through a secondary routing node I almost didn't pull. Vane's holding company appears twice in the chain, once at the beginning, once at the end. He funded the structure, and he's the beneficiary of the structure. He's not taking the operation from Marcus, Elena said. She said it to Marcus, who was standing 3 feet away, listening to every word. He's reclaiming it. He thinks of it as his. Marcus's face did something complicated. Vane, you know him. He came to my father's funeral. Marcus said it quietly. He stood at the front. He cried. A pause. He told me I had big shoes to fill. He was assessing whether you were a problem or an asset, Elena said. And he decided I was a problem. He decided you were uncontrollable, she said. There's a difference. An asset that can't be controlled eventually becomes the biggest liability. She looked at Marcus directly. He didn't want to destroy you. He wanted to replace you with someone he already owned. Holt, Marcus said. Holt has been Vane's man inside your organization since before your father died. She said it clean, no. Holt managed your father's final years. He managed the transition. And somewhere in that period, Vane decided the Harlow operation was too valuable to leave in the hands of a son who might make independent choices. Marcus stood very still. My father's heart attack, he said. The room went quiet. Elena looked at him. She had not gone there. She wasn't going to go there without something more than architecture and motive, because that was a specific accusation that required a specific kind of proof, and they didn't have it. Don't go there yet, she said. We don't have enough. I'm not accusing anyone, Marcus said. His voice was controlled in a way that sounded like it hurt to maintain. I'm just thinking about the timing. He paused. My father was healthy. His doctors said he was healthy. And then 4 months into the transition, he was gone. He breathed out. Holt was with him that night. I thought it was loyalty. Marcus. She said his name firmly. Right now, tonight, what matters is Vane. If we don't stop what happens at that pier, every other question becomes irrelevant, because we won't have the standing to ask it. She held his gaze until she felt him come back from wherever he'd gone. Are you with me? He looked at her. Something passed through his eyes: grief, rage, the specific devastation of a man whose past has just been rewritten in real time. And then it went somewhere internal, somewhere he locked it. Yes, he said. She turned back to the phone. Vincent. Where is Vane right now? That's the problem, Vincent said. He's not in the city. He flew private. This morning flight plan shows a destination in Connecticut. But I have reason to believe the flight plan is false. He's here, she said. I think he's here. And I think he intends to be present when Holt delivers. These men like Vane, they don't let the important moments happen without them in the room. So he's either at the pier or somewhere close to it. Or somewhere he can be reached the moment Price confirms the handoff. Vincent paused. Elena, I've completed 60% of the counter-documentation chain. If you can give me 40 more minutes, Diana Marsh called on Marcus's phone. He answered immediately, put it on speaker. Price is at the pier with 2 additional federal agents, Diana said. Her voice was clipped, moving fast. I've created a vehicle incident on the access road, nothing that draws sirens. Just a stalled delivery truck that'll take 20 minutes to clear. But Holt knows alternate routes to that pier, and he'll use one. How long does that actually buy us? Marcus said. 30 minutes if he's smart. Less if he's nervous, a beat. He's going to be nervous. 20 minutes, Elena said. Assume 20. Agreed, Diana said. What do you want me to do when the road clears? Marcus looked at Elena. She looked back at him. Nothing, Elena said. Pull back. Don't put yourself in federal sight lines. Marcus? Diana said. You heard her, Marcus said. Pull back, a pause. Then Diana said, okay, and hung up. 20 minutes, possibly less. Elena's phone buzzed. The photographs from Holt's property. Still loading, she'd been receiving them in batches, and this batch contained something she hadn't seen yet. She swiped through them fast. Financial records, correspondence, more routing documentation. And then a photograph that stopped her cold. It was a letter, different from the one she'd found before. Newer, dated 8 months ago, which put it at the exact moment Cara Delacroix had appeared in Marcus's life. It was addressed to Raymond Holt from Arthur Vane, and it outlined, in the precise and unemotional language of a man with complete confidence in his own authority, the final phase of a plan that had been running for years. She read it fast. Read the key lines twice. The wife is the remaining variable. Her connection to the Voss network makes her dangerous if she becomes aware of the full structure. The Delacroix introduction should serve to destabilize the marriage sufficiently. A man without a stable home is a man who makes mistakes. Ensure the emotional deterioration precedes the operational moves by no less than 6 months. The pregnancy, if it occurs, accelerates our preferred timeline. A man with a child on the way is either more cautious or more reckless, either outcome serves us. Position Harlow for the reckless response. She lowered the phone. Cara Delacroix had not been an accident. She had not been a coincidence. She had not even been primarily about destroying the marriage. She had been a tool to make Marcus reckless, and it had worked. The thing Marcus had said to Elena about the pregnancy, get rid of it, had not been purely cruelty. It had been a man in a destabilized state making exactly the reckless decision that Vane had predicted and planned for. A decision that would drive Elena away. A decision that would leave Marcus isolated, without the one person in his life who understood the full architecture of what was being done to him. She had stayed. She had not walked away. And that her staying, her silence, her patience, was the one thing Vane's plan had not accounted for. Marcus, she said. He looked at her. She handed him the phone. Let him read it. She watched his face while he did. Watched the moment he reached the line about positioning him for the reckless response. Watched him understand what that meant and what he had done and what it had been designed to produce. He lowered the phone. I was a variable they planned for, he said. Yes, and you were the one they didn't. She said nothing. There was nothing to add. He handed the phone back. His jaw was set. I need to make a call. To who? There are 3 captains inside my organization that Holt doesn't own, he said. I know which 3 because I tested them, quietly, over the last 8 months. After I started noticing the drift, he was already dialing. I'm going to need them in position before this is done. Marcus, if Holt has any monitoring on those captains' communications. He doesn't, Marcus said. Flat. Certain. Because I had those three move to a communication structure that routes outside anything Holt has access to. 6 months ago, he looked at her, because I suspected the possibility. She held his gaze. You've been running a parallel track. A small one. Nothing like what you built. He said it without defensiveness. I didn't know enough to build what you built, but I knew something was wrong, and I protected what I could. Which three, she said. He told her. She ran them through her own assessment people she'd observed over 4 years. He was right about all three. She would have chosen the same ones. Call them, she said. He called. He spoke in short, compact sentences. Locations and timing, and the specific shorthand of men who have already agreed in advance about what certain words mean in an emergency. She listened and tracked it, and her mind was simultaneously running the counter-documentation timeline against the 20 minutes orless window and the geography of Pier 7 against Vane's likely location. When Marcus ended the last call, she said, Vane will have a secondary contact with Price. Not through Holt. A separate line he can activate if Holt's delivery is compromised. How do you know? Because Vane is 71 years old, and he's been operating at this level for 40 years. Men like that don't build single-point dependencies. She was moving as she talked back toward the bedroom, the lockbox, the hidden phone. He'll have a backup channel, which means disrupting Holt's delivery tonight doesn't end the federal exposure. It delays it. She opened the lockbox. The only thing that ends it is discrediting the entire chain before Vane can activate his backup. Marcus followed her to the doorway. Vincent's 40 minutes. 23 now, she said. And we need the chain complete before Holt gets through that access road. She looked at Marcus. Get in the car. We're going. Going where? Vincent has the counter-documentation at 60%. He needs the physical archive from Holt's property to complete it the original routing documents, not photographs. The photographs are admissible, but the originals are better. She was already moving to the closet. Your people are already at that property. Tell them to secure the physical files and hold position. And us. We go to Vincent. She turned. You're going to walk into a room with my uncle for the first time, in the middle of the worst night of your life, and you're going to need to be functional. She looked at him hard. You do that? He looked at her. Yes, then let's go. The drive took 11 minutes. Marcus drove. Elena sat in the passenger seat with both phones active, Vincent in one ear, and the Pier 7 update running silent in the other. She monitored the access road situation. Through Diana's secondary contact, the stalled truck was still in place, but one of Price's agents had made contact with the truck driver, and the clearance was moving faster than expected. 15 minutes, not 20. She relayed it to Vincent. I need 10 more minutes, he said. You have 7. Elena, 7, Vincent. She heard him start moving faster. Heard the keyboard. Heard him directing someone else in the room, with him she didn't know who, didn't need to, with the same compressed efficiency she'd heard in him since she was a child watching him run things she wasn't supposed to be watching. Marcus drove and said nothing. She was aware of him beside her, his breathing, which was controlled but not calm, the specific rhythm of a man managing something large in a small space. She was aware of her own body, the weight and pressure of the pregnancy, her daughter who had gone still again in the way she did when Elena's stress hormones were high, as if the child was already learning the particular silence of women in this family. They reached Vincent's building, an unremarkable address commercial on the outside, several layers of security on the inside. A man Elena recognized met them at the street level. He looked at Marcus once, said nothing, and led them up. Vincent's operational room was on the 4th floor. Elena had been in it twice in her life. It was not impressive-looking plain walls, plain furniture screens that looked like they belonged in an office building rather than a command center. The impression was deliberate. Vincent was standing when they came in. He looked at Marcus the way he would look at weather, not hostile, not welcoming, assessing. Marcus looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Mr. Harlow, Vincent said. The formality was a choice. Mr. Voss, Marcus said, matching it. Elena walked past both of them to the primary screen. Status. 78%. The person at the keyboard said a young woman Elena didn't know, which meant she was new, which meant Vincent trusted her enough to put her in this room, which was the only information she needed. The second intermediary node is confirmed. I have the full routing chain from origination through dissolution. Can you tie Vane to it directly? His holding company appears at origination and at the beneficiary endpoint. That's a direct tie. But his personal signature doesn't appear anywhere. Everything runs through proxies. Proxies can be tied, Elena said. What's the proxy structure at origination? The young woman pulled up a document tree. Elena read it. Found the proxy name at origination. Ran it. That proxy director served on 2 of Vane's boards simultaneously during the account origination period, she said. Pull the board records. Already pulling. 90 seconds. Confirmed. Director crossover documented for a period of 18 months, overlapping with the account origination. That's the tie, Elena said. Document it and lock it. Doing it now. Marcus was behind her, she knew. She could feel him in the room. She didn't turn around. Vincent appeared at her shoulder. The physical archive from Holt's property arrived 4 minutes ago. My people drove it here directly. He set a folder on the table beside the keyboard. The original routing document is inside. Page 6. Elena opened the folder. Found page 6. The original document paper, faded slightly at the edges, the specific texture of something that had been handled many times. The account identifier in the body of the text matched exactly what they'd built the chain around. Scan it, she said. Full resolution. Attach it to the chain as the primary physical corroboration. Scanning now. Her phone buzzed. Diana. Road is clear, Diana said. Holt is 2 minutes from the pier. 2 minutes, Vincent, Elena said. 90 seconds, the woman at the keyboard said. 2 minutes against 90 seconds. Elena looked at the screen, watched the chain assembling itself in real time, the digital structure of a betrayal being unwound and redirected, the evidence of what Holt and Vane had built being transformed into the evidence of what they'd done. Who does this go to? Marcus said from behind her. She turned. He was looking at the screen. I have a contact, she said. Federal but not Price's division. Separate jurisdiction financial crimes. Someone who has no connection to whatever Vane's pipeline into law enforcement looks like. She held his gaze. Once this chain lands with that contact, Price's operation becomes a conflict of interest. Everything Holt delivers tonight gets flagged, pending review of the counter-documentation. That buries it, Marcus said. It buries the timeline, she said. It doesn't end everything permanently, but it gives us space. And space is what we need right now. Done, the woman at the keyboard said. The room went quiet. Elena picked up her personal phone. Found the contact. Her thumb hovered over the send command. She looked at Vincent. He nodded once. She looked at Marcus. He looked back at her, and she saw the thing in its face that she'd been waiting to see all night, not gratitude, not relief, but the specific look of a man who has finally stopped underestimating the person standing in front of him. Who has looked at someone he thought he knew, and understood that he was wrong, and understood the full weight of that wrongness. She pressed send. The chain transmitted. She watched the confirmation. 40 seconds later, her contact replied, received. Flagging immediately. Stand by. She lowered the phone. Holt's at the pier, Diana's voice said, still connected. He's inside. Let him go in, Elena said. What? Let him make the delivery. It doesn't matter now what he gives Price. The chain we just sent supersedes it, she exhaled. Let him walk in there, thinking he's won. Diana was silent for a moment. Understood. The call ended. The room held its silence. The woman at the keyboard was running secondary confirmations. Vincent stood with his arms folded, watching the screens with the blank patience of a man who had learned not to celebrate until the echo stopped. Marcus came to stand beside Elena. Not close, not reaching for anything. Just beside her, Vane. He said he'll know within the hour, she said. His contact with Price will tell him the delivery was made, but that it's been flagged. He'll understand what that means. He'll run. He'll try, she said. But the financial chain is already moving. That's not something you run from, it's something you get ahead of, and he can't get ahead of it because the documentation is already in federal hands. She looked at the screen. By morning, Arthur Vane has a problem that is significantly larger than Marcus Harlow. And Holt. Holt walks out of that pier thinking he's done everything right and spends the next 6 hours believing he's won. She paused. And then it starts to unravel, and he realizes someone was inside his own files, and he'll understand what happened. But by then the chain is already in motion, and understanding doesn't help him. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He'll know it was you. Yes, she said. Does that? He stopped, chose differently. Is that a problem? She thought about it. Not a legal problem. Not anymore. A personal problem. Eventually. But that's a different kind of fight, and it's one I know how to have. He nodded slowly. Your 3 captains, she said. Where are they positioned? 2 are at the site office. 1 is at the secondary warehouse. He paused. When Holt surfaces tomorrow and understands what's happened, he's going to move on the operation directly. He'll try to take what he can in the window before the legal situation closes around him. Then your captains need to be ready for that, I know. He pulled out his phone. I need an hour with them tonight. To brief them. He stopped. To tell them the truth about what's been happening. She looked at him. All of it? Enough of it. He met her eyes. I've been running an organization on a foundation that was rotted through without knowing it. The people who stayed loyal to me, they stayed loyal without understanding what they were inside. They deserve to know what they've been protecting and what it's going to look like going forward. She looked at him for a long moment. That's the right thing to do. I know, he said it simply, not proud, just certain. She nodded. Vincent appeared beside her. The secondary confirmation came back. Your financial crimes contact has opened a preliminary review. The counter-documentation chain is attached as the evidentiary basis. He paused. Vane's holding company will receive a financial inquiry notice by morning. Good. There's one more thing. Vincent's voice shifted fractionally, but she caught it. He looked at her, not at Marcus. The medical file. Holt's file on you, she waited. There's information in it, he said carefully, from your history with the Voss network. Nothing that would constitute a federal charge, given the counter-documentation we've built. But he stopped. It's what? It's detailed, he said. Specific. Things that would have required access to internal Voss records at a level that went beyond what Holt obtained through the freight consultation. He paused. Someone inside the Voss network provided supplemental information. Directly. Someone who had access to your personal history. The room was very quiet. Elena stood with this. You don't know who, she said. I have a suspect, Vincent said, and I am going to handle it. His voice went to a place. She recognized the place her mother's voice had gone to when something required a finality that didn't have a polite name. It is not your problem to solve. She looked at her uncle for a long moment. At the man who had argued with her 4 years ago and spent the intervening years watching from a distance and had answered the phone at 6 a.m. without a word of reproach. Thank you, she said. He looked at her. His face did something brief and controlled. Don't thank me yet. Tonight isn't finished. He was right. She knew he was right. She turned back to the screens. Checked the time. 10:58. 2 minutes to 11. Somewhere on Pier 7, Raymond Holt was sitting across from a federal agent named Walter Price, handing over 16 years of carefully assembled destruction, believing completely that he had won. And somewhere in the city, Arthur Vane was waiting for confirmation that his 40-year project of control was complete. Neither of them knew yet. Elena stood in Vincent's operational room, 7 months pregnant, standing between the husband she hadn't forgiven and the uncle she hadn't needed to forgive, watching a screen that represented the structural unraveling of a plan that had been designed to erase her from the story entirely. She was still here. Her daughter moved, a long rolling shift, the most sustained movement she'd felt all night. Not distress. Something else. Something that felt absurdly like impatience. She put one hand on her stomach. Not yet, she thought. Not quite yet. Marcus's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. It's Holt, he said. The room went absolutely still. Every person in it stopped moving. Holt was calling Marcus. From the pier. In the middle of his meeting with the federal agent. Which meant something had gone wrong with his delivery. Or Price had told him something. Or Holt had a phone that Price didn't know about, and he was making a move that none of them had anticipated. Marcus looked at Elena. She looked at the phone, then at him. Answer it, she said. He answered. Put it on speaker. Said nothing, just held the phone open, waiting. Holt's voice came through the speaker. She had never heard it before Marcus had described him, but she had never been in a room with Raymond Holt, had never needed to be. The voice was older than she'd expected. Deliberate. The voice of a man who chose every word the way a surgeon chose an instrument. Marcus. Holt said Raymond, Marcus said, matching his register exactly. A pause. I think Holt said slowly that we should talk. Marcus looked at Elena. She gave him the smallest nod. I think so too, Marcus said. Not on the phone, Holt said. In person. Tonight, a pause. I know a place. And before Marcus could answer, before Elena could process the shift in the architecture of what they were inside, Holt said the name of the location. And she felt the floor move. Because the location Raymond Holt had named was not a neutral meeting point. It was the address of the property they had raided 2 hours ago. He knew. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. The phone sat in Marcus's hand, with Holt's voice still present on the open line, the specific silence of a man who had said what he intended to say and was now waiting to see what it produced. Elena looked at Vincent. Vincent looked at the phone. The young woman at the keyboard had stopped typing. Marcus said, when midnight, Holt said, "Come alone." The line went dead. Marcus lowered the phone. The room breathed again, not easily, but breathed. He knows we pulled the archive, Elena said. She said it flat, no inflection. Not a question. He has a trip sensor on the property, Vincent said. He said it with the specific restraint of a man accepting his own error. My people would have triggered it on entry. I didn't anticipate a physical alert system that ran independently of the digital security. He's been waiting, Marcus said, not accusing, working it out. He took the price meeting, knowing we might find the archive. He built this as a contingency. He built everything as a contingency, Elena said. He was already thinking past the immediate running forward. The question is what he thinks he is left to negotiate with. His silence, Vincent said. He hasn't given Price everything yet. Or he gave Price a version enough to establish the meeting, not enough to constitute a complete handoff. He kept something back. Vincent moved to the keyboard, gestured for the young woman to pull up the peer surveillance data. If the delivery was complete, Holt has no reason to call Marcus directly. He'd let the legal mechanism run. Calling Marcus means he's holding something. Something he believes is still worth trading. Elena knew what it was before the thought finished forming. The physical letter, she said. The one naming my daughter. The room went quiet again. We photographed it, Vincent said carefully. But the original was in the archive, she said, which your people removed and brought here. She looked at Vincent. Is it in the folder? Vincent went to the folder on the table, opened it, went through the contents with the controlled efficiency of someone who already suspected the answer. He looked up. It's not here, he said. So that was it. Holt had pulled the letter before the archive left the property. He had the original document, the one that named her child, as a complication to be addressed. The one that, in the wrong hands, was not just evidence of Vane's plan, but a direct threat to her daughter that existed in writing, signed by the man who had orchestrated all of it. Holt didn't need to give that to Price. He needed to give it to Marcus. Not as a threat, as a demonstration, as proof that he understood exactly what leverage meant and how to hold it. Marcus was looking at her. I'm going, he said. I know, she said. Elena, she said again, you have to go. He won't meet with anyone else, and if you don't show, he activates whatever remaining channel he has to Price, and the letter becomes part of the federal record. She held Marcus's gaze. But you're not going alone, he said. He said, come alone, she said. He didn't say I'd stay here. Marcus looked at her. At her stomach. At the woman who was 7 months pregnant, standing in the middle of a room at 11 o'clock at night, after the longest and most damaging evening of both their lives, and whose face held exactly the same expression it had held when she'd folded an ultrasound photo in his study 48 hours ago. Unreadable. Decided. Not asking permission. You're not going inside, he said. No, she agreed. But I'll be close enough that if something goes wrong, there's someone outside that property who knows everything and has already sent everything and cannot be silenced by whatever Holt thinks he's holding. He understood what she meant. She was the failsafe. If Holt did something irreversible, Elena outside that building was the reason it didn't matter. Vincent, Marcus said. My people will be on the perimeter, Vincent said. 2 outside, 2 on the access points, he paused. This is as much my problem as yours tonight. Marcus nodded. Picked up his jacket, then stopped. He turned to Elena. He looked at her for a moment in a way he hadn't looked at her in years, not the calculating look, not the managing look, not even the look of honest desperation she'd seen in the bedroom when everything was unraveling. This was something older, something that predated all of it, that came from whatever he'd actually been in the beginning before the world they lived in, had sanded down everything that wasn't useful. If this goes wrong, he started. It won't, she said. If it does. Marcus, she said his name with enough weight to stop him. I have not come this far and done all of this to watch it go wrong at midnight in a building we already cleaned out. She held his gaze. Go. I'll be right behind you. He left first. She gave him 90 seconds, then followed. Vincent walked her to the car. At the street level, in the cold air, he put one hand on her arm briefly, the gesture of a man who did not make gestures lightly. Whatever happens in that building, he said, your daughter is already protected. Everything we built tonight, that protection exists regardless of what Holt is holding. I know, she said. I'm saying it so you hear it from someone other than yourself. He looked at her. His face in the cold light was older than she usually let herself see, the face of a man who had made choices for 40 years that had cost him things he didn't discuss. You did this right. Whatever it cost you, you did it right. She looked at her uncle, at the man who had answered the phone at 6 a.m. and cleared his night and put his own network on the line without once asking for anything in return. I know I was wrong to walk away the way I did, she said. 4 years ago. You needed to try your own life, he said. Flat. Final. The way he closed things that didn't need to stay open. It's done. She nodded, got in the car. She drove the 11 minutes back toward Holt's property and parked 2 blocks away in a position that gave her a sight line to the building's front approach. Marcus's car was already there. She could see it on the street, empty. He'd gone in. She sat in the dark with both phones and waited. The first 10 minutes were the hardest she'd ever sat through. Not because she was frightened, she was, at some level, but fear had a different texture when you'd spent this much of a night operating through it. It became almost ambient, a condition of the air rather than an acute sensation. She sat with it and breathed and watched the building and kept both phones active. Her daughter moved. Slow this time, almost lazy. The movement of a child who was finding her position, settling into something. Soon Elena said quietly to the empty car, not yet. At 12:17, Marcus came out. He walked to his car, stood beside it for a moment with one hand on the roof. Then he looked up and found her car in the dark. She didn't know how. She hadn't moved, but he looked directly at her and walked toward her. She unlocked the passenger door. He got in. He smelled like cold air and something else, the specific sweat of a confrontation that had required everything. He sat back against the seat and stared at the windshield. In his hand was an envelope. She looked at it. He gave it to me, Marcus said. The letter. Yes. She looked at his face, trying to read what had happened in the 17 minutes she'd been sitting in the dark. His face was not the face of a man who had won something. It was the face of a man who had come through something and was still determining the shape of the damage. What did he say, she said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry. She waited. He said, and I'm telling you this exactly. The way he said it, he said, I did what Vane paid me to do, and then I kept doing it because it became what I was. I don't expect you to understand that, but I want you to know that the letter about your daughter, I never intended to use it. I kept it because Vane required documentation of every contingency. I wouldn't have used it. Marcus paused, and then he handed me the envelope. Elena looked at the envelope. Do you believe him? She said. A long silence. I don't know, Marcus said. I think he believed it when he said it. Whether that's the same thing as it being true, he stopped. I've known Raymond Holt for 16 years. He taught me things about running an operation that my own father never taught me. And the whole time, he didn't finish that sentence. He didn't need to. Where is he now? She said. Gone, Marcus said. He had a bag, a car. It was already arranged. He looked at the envelope. He said the Price meeting was partial. He gave enough to establish contact, but not enough for an actionable case. He said he'd walk away from it, completely tell Price the information was compromised, the source unreliable. Price loses his case before it starts. He paused. In exchange for the counter-documentation, we built not being used offensively against him. She absorbed this. He negotiated his exit. Yes, Marcus exhaled. I let him. She looked at Marcus. Because going after Holt fully pulls everything into a legal process that takes years and costs, he stopped. That cost you exposure you shouldn't have to carry. The counter-documentation keeps Vane pinned. Holt's silence closes the federal channel. And Holt disappears. He met her eyes. I made a call. Tell me if I was wrong. She thought about it. Genuinely considered whether she would have made the same call. No, she said. You weren't wrong. He nodded. Looked away. Vain, she said. The financial inquiry chain is already running, he said. Vincent's documentation sees to that. Vane is going to spend the next several years managing a federal financial investigation that has nothing to do with the Harlow operation and everything to do with the structure he built to control it. Marcus's voice was even. He's 71 years old. He doesn't have the energy for that fight. He'll settle. He'll restructure. He'll lose enough that he can't rebuild what he was trying to build here. And the Harlow operation. Marcus was quiet for a moment. 3 captains I trust. A structure that needs to be rebuilt from the inside out. A year, maybe more, of work that isn't glamorous and doesn't come with the illusion that everything is under control. He looked at his hands on his knees. It's going to be hard. Yes, she said, it is. He looked at her. Are you going to be there for it? The question sat in the car between them. Honest in a way that questions between them hadn't been honest in a long time. She looked at the envelope in his hand. The letter with her daughter's name in it, her daughter, written as a contingency, as a complication to be addressed, by a man who had calculated her child's existence into a plan built on the assumption that women like Elena could be managed and moved, and eventually eliminated from the picture. She thought about the ultrasound photo she'd folded and put in her pocket. She thought about the bathroom at 3 in the morning in the first year of their marriage, and after year of their broken, when everything and Marcus had held her and said nothing, and she had believed they were the kind of people who survived. She thought about what surviving actually required, and what it had cost her, and whether the cost had been worth it, and whether worth it was even the right metric for the kind of thing that had happened between them. I don't know yet, she said. Marcus held her gaze. She watched him take that answer and not argue with it, not try to negotiate it into something better, not manage it. He just held it. Okay, he said. I'm going to have our daughter, she said. And I'm going to take the time I need to figure out what I want. Not what the situation requires. Not what is strategically correct. She held his eyes. What I actually want. Yes, he said, quietly. And you don't get to rush that. I know. And what you said in the study, I know, he said. Harder. The hardness of a man pushing it into himself rather than away. I know what I said. I know what it was. I'm not going to explain it away. He exhaled. I'm just telling you that I know. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had laughed genuinely, unexpectedly laughed in a conference room, the first time she'd walked into his world, who had spent 5 years slowly becoming someone she had to watch instead of trust, who had said the worst thing she'd ever heard him say, and then spent one long, terrible night, discovering what she'd been carrying in silence beside him. Drive me home, she said. He drove. The house was quiet when they got back. The kind of quiet that a house holds at 2 in the morning, not peaceful, exactly, but empty of the immediate. She moved through it slowly, aware of her own exhaustion in a deep physical way that had nothing performative about it. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed. Marcus appeared in the doorway. He didn't come in. I'll take the guest room, he said. She nodded. He started to turn. Marcus, he turned back. She looked at him from across the room. At the distance between the door and the bed, which was not very large in physical terms, and was enormous in every other way. The man you were tonight, she said, in Vincent's room. The decision you made with Holt. The way you drove here and didn't talk. Because you understood I needed the quiet. She held his gaze. That's the man I married. I need you to understand that I remember who that man is, even now. He stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame, and his face doing something private and complicated. Thank you, he said. Low rough. I'm not forgiving you, she said. I'm just telling you I remember. I understand the difference, he said. He went to the guest room. She heard the door close softly without drama. She lay back on the bed, put both hands on her stomach. Her daughter shifted under her palms, a long, slow movement, like a child turning over in sleep. I know, Elena said quietly to the ceiling. I know. She lay in the dark and thought about her mother, who had told her when she was 12 years old that silence was a weapon, that speaking before you were ready handed your opponent everything. She thought about whether her mother had been right, or whether that lesson, useful as it had been, had also cost her things that words spoken earlier might have saved. She didn't have an answer. She thought she might not have one for a while, and that might be the most honest position available. She slept. For the first time in 36 hours, she actually slept. In the morning, she came downstairs and Marcus had made coffee. Not because he'd always made coffee, he hadn't, usually. He'd always waited for it to be made. He was standing at the counter making it with the slightly deliberate focus of a man who was choosing to do a small thing correctly, and she watched him for a moment from the bottom of the stairs before he knew she was there. He heard her, turned, looked at her with the careful look not managed, just careful. The look of a man who understood he was on uncertain ground and was not going to pretend otherwise. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd taken her prenatal vitamins 2 mornings ago, performing normalcy for a man she hadn't trusted with the truth. She sat there now without performing anything. He set a cup in front of her. Vincent called, he said. Vane received notice of the financial inquiry this morning. His legal team filed for a preliminary injunction. He sat down across from her. Vincent says the injunction won't hold. The documentation chain is too complete. Good, she said. Price's case is gone, Marcus said. Holt contacted him this morning and withdrew. Price has nothing without the source. He wrapped his hands around his own cup. It's over. The legal piece is over. The operational piece isn't, she said. No. He met her eyes. That's going to take time. She nodded, drank her coffee. It was good he'd paid attention to how she took it, which was a small thing. But she noticed small things and always had. I want to restructure the legitimate subsidiaries, she said. Formally, cleanly. In a way that separates them from the operational network with real walls, not the walls Holt built. She held Marcus's gaze. I want to be involved in that, officially, with a real role. Marcus looked at her. Not as your wife, she said. As someone with a stake in the outcome. Yes, he said. No hesitation. And I want you to acknowledge, in front of your captains, that there was information inside your organization that was deliberately used to manipulate your perception of me. She said it levelly. I'm not asking for a public statement. I'm asking for an acknowledgement inside the room where it matters. He held her gaze steadily. I'll do that, good. They sat in the kitchen in the winter morning light, and outside the window the garden was still there, the roses she'd forgotten to cut back, still alive in the wrong season, slightly ragged at the edges, nothing like the controlled, curated thing they were supposed to be. She looked at them. I meant what I said last night, she said, not looking at him. About not knowing. About needing time, I know. I need you to not interpret anything I've said this morning as resolution. She looked at him. It isn't. I know that too, he said. She nodded. Looked back at the garden. What did you name her? Marcus said. Quietly. She looked at him. In your mind, he said. You've been thinking of her as someone for months. You called her she before we ever talked about it. He held her gaze. What name did you give her? She hadn't told him. She'd kept it the way she kept other things held close, private, not ready. She looked at Marcus across the kitchen table, at the man who had a long way to travel to become someone she full trusted again, who had taken 17 minutes in a room with the person who'd tried to destroy both their lives and come out with a letter and a decision, and her daughter's name on a piece of paper that he'd protected without being asked. Nora, she said. Something moved in his face. He didn't try to manage it. Nora, he repeated, like he was learning the shape of it. After my mother, she said. He nodded, said nothing, which was the right thing. They finished their coffee in the kind of quiet that wasn't comfortable exactly, but was real. The silence of two people who had stopped pretending to each other and were finding out what was underneath. It wasn't clean, it wasn't resolved. Resolution was a word that belonged to simpler stories. But it was true, and true was something. 3 weeks later, Elena was sitting in a hospital room with a small, red-faced, extremely opinionated person on her chest, and the world outside the window was going about its business without any awareness that anything had changed, which struck her as funny in a way she was too tired to fully articulate. Marcus was in the chair beside the bed. He'd been there for 11 hours. He looked wrecked, unshaven, rumpled, the controlled presentation completely gone. He was looking at Nora with the expression of a man who has encountered something he has absolutely no framework for, which was the most honest she had seen him in years. Nora was looking back at him with the dark, unfocused gaze of someone who had opinions about everything and the vocabulary for none of it. She looks like she's judging me, Marcus said. She is, Elena said. She's been doing it since she arrived. He looked up. Their eyes met. He almost smiled, something small and genuine that had none of his usual architecture in it. "She's going to be terrifying," he said. "Yes," Elena said. "She is." He reached out one finger. Nora's hand, impossibly small, impossibly complete, closed around it with the absolute authority of someone who doesn't know yet that the world has opinions about what she's entitled to. He looked at that closed hand for a long time. "Elena," he said, not looking up. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. He looked up. "Don't try to say it all right now," she said. "It won't fit. And I'm very tired." She held his gaze. "You have time to do it in pieces. I'm willing to let you try." He looked at her. She looked back at him. Between them, Nora breathed with the steady, indifferent certainty of someone who has decided to be here regardless of the conditions. "Okay," he said. Outside the window, the city did what cities do, moved and changed and continued without sentiment. Inside the room, 3 people occupied the particular silence that comes after a long storm, when the damage is still visible, but the rain has stopped and there is light again. Uncertain and thin, but present. It was not a happy ending. It was not the ending any of them had expected, or planned for, or earned in any clean sense. It was just the next thing, the next true thing after all the false ones. And Elena, who had spent a long time being silent in rooms where silence was the only weapon available to her, who had learned to fold things carefully and wait and watch and hold her power until the moment it was needed. Elena looked down at her daughter's face and understood something she hadn't had words for until now. She had stayed silent because she was waiting to be ready. She was ready. She didn't have anything left to hide. Nora slept. She slept the way newborns sleep, completely, without reservation, with the specific abandon of someone who has not yet learned that the world requires you to stay alert. Her mouth made small involuntary movements. Her fingers, even in sleep, maintained their grip on whatever they'd last held. Elena watched her from the hospital bed and felt the particular tiredness that existed past exhaustion, the kind that wasn't unpleasant, that had a texture like the last few minutes before you fall asleep, when the body finally stops pretending it can keep going. Marcus had fallen asleep in the chair. She hadn't noticed it happen. One moment he'd been watching Nora with that unguarded expression, and then somewhere in the quiet hours of early morning, he'd tipped sideways against the chair's armrest and gone under. He was snoring slightly. She hadn't known he snored. Or she'd forgotten. There were years of small information about this man that she'd stopped collecting at some point, and she didn't yet know which of it she wanted back. She looked at the ceiling for a while. She thought about Raymond Holt, who was somewhere she didn't know, moving through whatever remained of his life with the specific weight of a man who had spent 16 years building something and then traded it away for an exit. She thought about whether she felt anything about that anger, satisfaction, the complicated aftertaste of justice that never quite fits the shape of what was promised. She found something quieter than any of those, something closer to the feeling of a thing being finished. Thought about Arthur Vane, who was 71 years old, and in a room somewhere with lawyers working through the beginning of a legal problem that was going to outlast whatever he'd intended for his remaining years. She had no particular feeling about Vane. He was the kind of man who existed at enough remove from the human consequences of his decisions that hating him felt abstract. He had looked at Marcus's organization and seen an asset that had been misallocated. He had looked at Elena and seen a variable. He had looked at a child who didn't exist yet and seen a complication. And somewhere in all of that looking, he had never once seen people. That was its own kind of punishment, she thought, to go through 71 years of life and never really see the people in it. Nora made a sound. Not a cry, something smaller. A complaint about something internal, some adjustment her body was making. Elena shifted her arm slightly, and Nora settled, and the room went quiet again. Vincent had sent a message at 4 in the morning. She'd seen it without responding. Vane's injunction was denied. The financial inquiry proceeds. His legal team is already in preliminary settlement discussions. He won't fight it. Too old, too expensive, too visible. It's done. And below that, after a pause indicated by the timestamp, "You did well. Your mother would have said you did well." She had read that twice. Put the phone down. Not because it didn't matter, because it mattered more than she knew how to respond to at 4 in the morning with a newborn on her chest. Her mother, who had died 6 years ago, quietly, in a house in another city, having spent her last years doing exactly what Elena had tried to do, stepping back from the world she'd come from, attempting something smaller and more human. Her mother, who had been better at the stepping back than Elena had managed, or perhaps had simply had more time to practice it. She wondered what her mother would actually have said. Not the version Vincent offered, which was generous and compressed. The real version her mother in a kitchen somewhere, in the specific voice she used when she was being honest rather than supportive. She thought her mother would have said, "You waited too long to make some decisions, and not long enough to make others, and you'll spend a while figuring out which was which." That's the work. That sounded right. That sounded like her. Marcus stirred in the chair. Not waking, just shifting, the way people do in deep sleep when something at the surface of them is processing. He settled again. The snoring stopped and then resumed at a slightly different frequency. Elena looked at him. The restructuring of the legitimate subsidiaries had already begun. In a preliminary way, she'd spent 2 phone calls in the days before the birth laying groundwork with Marcus's legal team and her own contact, the financial crimes liaison, who had received their counter-documentation chain. There was a version of the Harlow operations above-ground business that could be rebuilt into something genuinely clean, and she was going to be the one who built it, and it was going to take 2 or 3 years of methodical, unglamorous work. She was clear-eyed about that. She was also clear-eyed about what it meant to do that work while figuring out what she and Marcus were going to be. Those were parallel questions that didn't have to resolve at the same speed. She had learned, in the last several weeks, that she was capable of holding more uncertainty than she'd previously given herself credit for, that the need to know the answer immediately was something she could set aside when she chose to. Marcus had not pushed, she noted this. He had done the thing he said he'd do in front of his 3 captains, had stated, plainly, without ornamentation, that information inside the organization had been used to distort his judgment about someone in his personal life, and that the distortion had led him to treat that person in ways that were not acceptable, and that he took full responsibility for. He had not named Holt in that conversation. Holt was gone, and naming him would have made the acknowledgement about Holt rather than about Marcus's own choices. He had understood that distinction without being told. She had not been in the room for that conversation. He'd told her about it afterward, briefly, without asking for credit. She had nodded. She had not said thank you, because it wasn't a favor, it was a thing that needed doing, and he'd done it. But she had registered it. The window of the hospital room was beginning to gray at the edges. Not sunrise yet, the threshold before it, when the dark becomes something other than dark without yet becoming light. Nora opened her eyes, not fully just enough to indicate she was present and had opinions. She looked at the ceiling with the particular expression of someone encountering it for what felt like the 100th time, and finding it only marginally more interesting than before. "Good morning," Elena said quietly. Nora blinked, refocused, found Elena's face, and stayed there with the deep, searching attention that newborns brought to faces as if the face contained everything worth understanding, and she was determined to understand it completely. "I know," Elena said. "There's a lot to figure out." Nora's face shifted something between a frown and a question, the vocabulary of a person who has something to say and is frustrated by her current limitations. "You'll have words soon enough," Elena said, "and when you do, use them. Don't do what I did." She looked at her daughter's face in the gray pre-morning light. "Don't wait until you're so ready that you've missed things." She paused. "Some things don't wait for ready." Marcus's voice came from the chair, rough with sleep. "Are you giving our daughter life advice at 5 in the morning?" She glanced at him. He was awake, had been awake for some portion of that, she suspected. His eyes were clear in a way that suggested longer than the last 30 seconds. "Yes," she said. "Is the advice good? Better than anything I got at this age." He made a sound that was close to a laugh, but didn't quite become one. He straightened in the chair, rubbed the back of his neck, looked at Nora with the same helpless expression he'd had since she arrived. "She still looks like she's judging me," he said. "She's assessing," Elena said. "There's a difference. What's the difference?" "Judging is a conclusion. Assessing is still gathering information." She looked at Nora. "She's still gathering." Marcus looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he said quietly, to Nora rather than to Elena, "That's fair. I'd give me time too." Nora blinked at him, continued her assessment. Elena watched this. The specific sight of Marcus Harlow, who had spent his adult life in rooms where his authority was the first thing anyone acknowledged. Sitting in a hospital chair at 5 in the morning, being patiently evaluated by a person who weighed 7 pounds and had been alive for 11 hours and was not impressed by any of his previous credentials. There was something right about that. Something that felt like the beginning of a correction. She didn't say so. Some things didn't need to be said to be real. Later that morning, after the nurses had come and the pediatrician had done her assessment, and the particular bureaucracy of new life had been attended to, Marcus stepped out to make calls, and Elena had 30 minutes alone with Nora in the quiet room. She used them the way she'd used difficult quiet, her whole life not to rest but to think. She thought about the question Marcus had asked her weeks ago in the car outside Holt's property. Why are you still doing this? She'd given him the true answer in the moment her daughter, the legal exposure, the practical calculus of a woman who understood that removing herself from the situation didn't remove the situation from her. But there was another answer she hadn't given him, hadn't been ready to give him. She had stayed not in the house, not in the marriage in its broken form, but in the fight, in the effort to understand and dismantle what was being done to both of them, because she was not a woman who left things unfinished. That was the real truth underneath the practical one. She had come into this marriage with intent. She had stayed in it through difficult years with intent. She was not capable of walking away from something while it was still mid-collapse without understanding what had collapsed and why. Her mother's voice again, from somewhere. The problem with that is you have to be careful what you decide to finish. Yes, she was aware of that problem. Nora was asleep again. The small, fierce face had released into something smooth, younger, temporarily free of whatever urgent processing she'd been doing. Elena thought, I am going to spend years making sure you know how to use your voice. Not in the way she'd been taught to use hers as a strategic reserve, deployed carefully, held back until the optimal moment. That had served her. It had also cost her. The cost was something she was still calculating, and she suspected the final number would be larger than she wanted it to be. Nora would learn something different, would learn that silence was a tool, not a requirement, would learn to read rooms without disappearing into them, would learn, and this was the one Elena felt most certain about, that the most dangerous thing a person could be was someone that other people had decided to stop seeing. Because Nora would not be invisible, Elena was going to make sure of that. Marcus came back at 9 o'clock with coffee he'd gotten from somewhere better than the hospital cafeteria, which told her he'd gone further than the ground floor, which told her he'd needed the walk. He set a cup beside her without comment, looked at Nora. Vincent called, he said. He wants to visit. When you're ready. Tell him a week, she said. He also said. He paused. He said to tell you the loose end inside his network has been handled. He said you'd know what that means. She knew what it meant. The person inside the Voss network who had supplemented Holt's file on her. Handled was a word with a range of possible meanings in Vincent's vocabulary. She chose not to ask for the specific definition. Good, she said. Marcus sat down, drank his coffee. They were quiet for a while in the way they'd been quiet in the car, and in the kitchen that morning the quiet that wasn't absence but presence, the sound of two people in the same space without performance. I've been thinking about the subsidiaries, Marcus said. So I want to bring in outside legal oversight. Not just our people, someone independent. A firm that has no history with the Harlow name. She looked at him. That was going to be my first recommendation. I know, he said. I wanted to say it first so you'd know I'd already gotten there. She looked at him for a moment. Why does it matter who said it first? It doesn't, he said. It matters that I thought it independently. That I'm not just ratifying your judgment, that I'm arriving at the same places on my own. He met her eyes. Because that's what this needs to look like going forward. Not you pulling me toward the right decisions. Both of us reaching them. She held his gaze. That's a significant shift for you. Yes, he said. I'm aware. You've been good at being aware of things this week, she said. I'm watching to see how long it holds. He didn't flinch from that. That's fair. It is. He looked at Nora. She's going to watch too. She's got your eyes. Elena looked at her daughter. At the small closed face, the dark lashes. She has her own eyes, she said. We'll find out whose they look like when she's older. I hope they're yours, Marcus said, simply, without strategy. She looked at him. He shrugged slightly. The gesture of a man who has said a true thing and isn't going to take it back. She turned back to Nora. The morning came fully through the window, real light now, winter thin but present. It caught the edge of the bassinet, the white blanket, the small brown fist resting against a small round cheek. It fell across the floor in a long rectangle and moved slowly the way winter light moves, unhurried, not trying to be anything other than what it was. Elena sat in that light and felt for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, something that was not strategy and not vigilance, and not the specific tension of a woman managing multiple things simultaneously. Something quieter. Not peace exactly, she was too honest for that word right now. But the absence, briefly, of emergency. The absence of emergency was its own kind of rest. She thought she might be able to work with that. Nora stirred, made the small complaint sound. Elena shifted her arm and Nora settled and the room held its quiet, and outside of the window the city continued without caring about any of it, and that was fine. That was exactly fine. Some mornings were just mornings. This one, after everything, was allowed to be.